to the final round of Swiss here, day one in Anaheim. Let's get into it. Marcus Dion right away, Calyrex, Shadow Rider, and that Incineroar. Double restricted for Wolves right away hitting the field.
Yeah, and Incineroar feels like a restricted Pokemon sometimes too, so maybe an appropriate group of 4 Pokemon. I think this combination of Incineroar and the Calyrex from Marcus' side, you're kind of the more conservative lead, maybe if you want to take a more traditional game plan there and going to get the Intimidate down to this Koraidon. It does not have the Clear Amulet, instead going for the Life Orb, so threatening more damage. Something we've seen from Wolfe before, I believe, also on his UIC winning team. And then on the opposite side of the field, with Wolfe having both restricted Pokemon, maybe going for some big damage here, but also with the sort of awkward option of maybe you try to anticipate a Trick Room and flip it yourself.
Yeah, and looking over this, it's a little bit awkward. So when you have this Koraidon, of course, you would love to be able to leverage a lot of damage right away on this turn, but eyeing up an Incineroar, that can stop it in its tracks as well. This Calyrex is kind of in a little bit of a weird spot because, of course, yeah, Trick Room could be good, but when you know that Wolfe also has a couple of those options, is that something you go for? Like, where do we go from here?
Yeah, tough to make a read, too, where fake out into the Koraidons, that's hard to avoid, where you can't fake out the Lunalas, so it seems very likely that's going to happen. Wolfe anticipating going to switch in the Ursaluna, hoping to end this turn with Trick Room active.
A Terrestrialization for the very first turn of this match coming out, and onto none other than the Calyrex Ice Rider. Of course, when you could get the super effective hit from that Koraidon, you got to make sure that you drop that weakness, so we'll get to see that Terrestrialization fire coming out. Knockoff from the Incineroar into the Lunala, so much damage coming on out, bringing it down to a third of its health. Glacial Lance is going to be the follow-up. How much damage is it going to be? Lunala is gone, and look how much damage the Ursaluna has taken.
Oh, I don't think that was what Wolfe was looking for at all. Gets red hard there, loses a Pokemon immediately, gives up a Chilling Aid of his Calyrex, and Ursaluna's going to go down pretty quickly itself. Of course, you don't take damage from Burn the first turn that Flame Orb activates, but this Pokemon's very weakened now, and it tends to be a slower Pokemon. Wolfe has lost his Trick Room setter, going to have a hard time getting any attacks off. Koraidon going to come out back on the battlefield, but we'll see the value of this Fire Terrestrialization from this Calyrex. It's good against almost everything in Wolfe's team. Resists now the Fire type attacks of this Koraidon. If Incineroar's around, doesn't have to worry about a Will-O-Wisp from it, though. And yeah, I think even would have avoided the attack from Lunala, but close combat coming down, going to pick up a knockout for Wolfe.
Incineroar instantly gone, clean one-hit KO coming on out. Koraidon instantly to make an impact on this turn. A little bit of recoil in return from that Rocky Helmet, but I feel like you got the better end of the trade that time around. Now, looking at these two Pokemon, of course, it's going to be an Ursaluna, and when you're eyeing up that Fire Terrestrialization, that's going to be a double KO for Wolfe to completely flip the script.
So maybe it's not so bad for Wolfe after all. Learning a little bit about perhaps the way all these Pokemon are trained. Ursaluna going to move first, pick up that knockout. So, hey, maybe not like a super great turn one from Wolfe, but this is a great comeback there. Really plays himself back into the game. Both sides now have lost a restricted Pokemon, so we're almost dead even here.
Yeah, looking at that as well, of course, when you're eyeing up the Ursaluna, that is on a timer. It's now down to 7 HP. It can only be around for one more turn before it's KO'd from that burn damage. Wondering if it could have maybe had to protect on that turn, but now it's going to be 2 offensive Pokemon for Marcus hitting the field, Miraidon and the Ogerpon, the last 2 Pokemon. And where can we see the impact? Of course, when you have that Miraidon, there is no access to any sort of protect since it is that Assault Vest.
Yeah, pretty strange situation here where, and Marcus said you're probably going to go with some sort of attack to finish Ursaluna off here. Don't want to actually allow it to attack anything, and you can't just double protect, as you mentioned. The Koraidon and Wolfe side sort of an interesting situation where do you think because you kind of have to pay the tax of attacking the Ursaluna, you can get away with swing with the Koraidon, or you go for a protect here and hope that the combination of Wolfe's final 2 Pokemon are able to win a 2-on-2?
Well, this is a big turn for the match. I mean, Wolfe has taken so much momentum, and a fourth Pokemon in the back still unrevealed to Marcus. Might be the opportunity now is, of course, when you're eyeing up this Miraidon on the opposing end, it's something that could put a lot of pressure. So that's going to be swap out from Koraidon and none other than Amoonguss, the former idol. Let's give the props here to hit the field. Spiky Shield from the Ogerpon, so just eyeing up what this Miraidon can do on the turn. Draco Meteor into the Amoonguss to soak up the hit and survive 26 HP.
Well, that's a really surprising move. The Ursaluna's going to get the swing. It took all that damage, but it picks up a one-hit knockout on the Miraidon. Wolfe looked like he was in such a bad spot to start this match, but that's a massive knockout. Ursaluna's going to feint to burn damage, but it goes down a hero.
Ursaluna essentially only had 2 turns on the field to really make an impact, and picking up not 1 but 2 restricted Pokemon KOs in its time. It has done its job. It's going to be only the Ogerpon Wellspring left for Marcus Dion, and Koraidon now can hit the field, and we've seen how much damage that Koraidon can do. That is everything. And I feel like just one move flick away from closing this out.
Yes, potentially a tricky spot. Wolfe taking some time to think here, really smart, where even though he has one Pokemon remaining, you still get this, the extra 45 seconds to select the Pokemon if you want to think through the move here. Ogerpon's sort of an interesting position where if it was anything that wasn't a grass-type Pokemon, you could just go for a Rage Powder and attack here for an easy finish. Will, however, be immune to that Rage Powder from Amoonguss, so still potentially a trickier spot for Wolfe here. Wants to make sure he doesn't throw this game.
You got to make sure all the eyes are dotted. I mean, yeah. You got to think through it. You got to make sure, the eyes are dotted, the T's are crossed. But that's just going to be the concession from Marcus. And Wolfe Glick to take the first game in the set, which is such a high-intensity match. I mean, when you go from that first turn, that call from Marcus, and the amount of damage, to then see how Wolfe completely flipped that on his table, like, that was crazy.
Yeah, I really love that recovery from Wolfe there, because I mean that first turn was devastating, right? Where I don't know exactly what he was going for there, but you wound up losing restricted Pokemon for free. Definitely not what he was expecting, but yeah, Ursaluna winds up being so clutch. That first pair of knockouts, I think, kind of made sense, right? You're at Marcus's end, like there isn't a whole lot you can do to avoid giving up, as we see poor Lunala and Ursaluna here just getting absolutely ravaged by that Glacial Lance. But hey, they pay it right back there. Ursaluna picks up a big knockout. It's really this turn that surprised me so much as we that one afterward, where I think Wolfe playing defensively, he switches the Koraidon out, ends up being pretty good. But I think that I was surprised that the Miraidon went for the Draco Meteor there. Maybe feeling like you kind of have to because you're afraid of the damage back in the other direction. And maybe one of the weaknesses of the moveset of this Miraidon, right, where we've seen a surprising amount of Miraidon that don't have that Dazzling Gleam move. This is one of them where the only spread move is Snarl. I think it would have been enough to pick up the knockout there, though actually would have been kind of close, but maybe feel like, hey, if Koraidon does choose to swing here, I could be throwing the game that way instead. So it doesn't get the read quite right there. Wolfe able to take advantage, and wow, I guess 7 HP in a dream there for the Ursaluna, but really making some impressive damage there, and we see why that Pokemon's become so popular in this format.
And definitely, I feel like there is that opportunity when you are looking at that Ursaluna that took so much damage on that swap in. You do have a couple of more defense pieces or just Pokemon with Protect, and when you know it's on a timer and it only had 2 turns on the field, could have maybe tried to slow down the pace a little bit, but maybe not aware of the speed. But we're going to see how it switches up in game 2. There was a lead that seemed to work for Marcus, so we're going to run it back, and a full run back for both of these players.
I'm sort of fascinated that both players opted to do this again. I felt like that last game probably didn't go quite according to either player's game plan, where that was a very chaotic sort of game where Wolfe really dragged it back just by struggling. So can you imagine that Wolfe does something a little different this time?
Yeah, and already you get to see that with the move Hover, and I'm curious if Marcus wants to make such an aggressive read or play as well, especially too getting good information about the speed tiering of the Pokemon. So already going to be a little bit of a switch up. Incineroar's not sticking around to find out any sort of wrap. Instead, it's going to be Annihilate that hits the field.
Oh, great switch.
Yeah, so if this is something like a fighting type move, that could be everything. And I'm curious with the Calyrex Ice Rider click, because that is the wide guard from the Lunala. No spread damage moves. Close combat is also not going to do anything. And Leech Seed from this Calyrex. Now, if Lunala sticks around, it is going to be losing valuable health.
Yeah, Marcus may be the god of tier 1s there, or turn 1s there, where once again it's just a great turn. The switch into the Annihilate may not seem incredible, but I think it really puts Wolfe in a tricky spot here. Leech Seed onto this Lunala is tricky, where you don't want to keep just feeding easy HP to the Calyrex. Makes it harder to keep clicking that wide guard. And Annihilate makes this very tricky for Wolfe, where you really like to try to get your Moongeist Beam into that slot now to try to avoid the threat of a final Gambit. You can't use it on the Lunala because it's immune to the fighting type attack. So you'll have to see what this Annihilate blocks into, but it really does force Wolfe's hand, where it's really hard to do anything with Koraidon except for Click Protect, although Wolfe maybe has other ideas, certainly at least considering something a bit more bold.
I mean, fortune favors the bold here, and up 1 in the set. We've seen that Marcus is willing to be making these calls, and if Wolfe can maybe get a little bit ahead of that, it could be everything. Now we're going to see Terrestrialization turn 2 of this match, and with that Koraidon, this is where you can really get to see a lot of this offensive pressure come out into this fire type. And Koraidon, you know how much damage you can deal in the sun with those fire type attacks. Shadow Claw from the Annihilate so fast, and Lunala super effective is down. Vertical hit, 1 restricted for Wolfe is gone. Now it's going to be up to this Koraidon to try and make that difference up with an attack here on this turn. Flare Blitz in retaliation. You have the Sun, you have the Terrestrialization into the Calyrex. That's going to be a 1-for-1 trade on the turn.
Yeah, both restricted Pokemon going down. These two Pokemon these two trainers seem to always like trading restricted Pokemon one for one. And a really interesting read by both trainers. I don't think that critical hit on Lunala likely mattered with the double weakness there, but Marcus does still have to pay a little bit there. Where locking into the Shadow Claw rather than the final Gambit means that you can't just immediately switch moves and try to pick up a knockout on this Koraidon. Certainly Shadow Claw not going to be able to knock out anything else on Wolfe's team in a single blow. So Koraidon perhaps going to be free again to swing again on the next turn, pending what Pokemon Marcus has in the back.
That'll be the question here, and we got to see that it was the Miraidon in that game number 1, but this time around, it was just going to be Incineroar that still hits the field. So we will have to wait to see what the last Pokemon is. But now, when you are eyeing up this turn, again, this is Incineroar that has a little bit fake out pressure, so that could help out.
Yeah, definitely could. Also, it's intimidated this Koraidon twice now, so Wolfe probably going to be heavily incentivized to get that off of the field, which leaves poor Mungus here to stare down both Annihilate and the Fire-type Incineroar. Still have the options if you're, Wolfe. Do you try to go for a Spore on one of the slots? You just defend your Mungus. Do you attack anyway? Where Wolfe has played this game pretty recklessly. Despite the Intimidate, if you expect Marcus maybe to ignore the Koraidon slot, anticipating a switch, you could try to get a cheeky Pollen Puff off to that slot. Lots of interesting options. Annihilate is going to get out here and reset its attack so it can use a different attacking move once it returns to battle.
And that's going to be the confirmation finally of the 4th Pokemon. Yes, it is going to be that second restricted Miraidon hits the field, as well Hadron Engine. So if there is going to be something like a Spore from the Amoonguss, of course it won't be able to hit anything because of that electric terrain. But a switch for a switch, Ursaluna to hit the field as well on this turn, as now we get to see the terrestrialization coming out from the opposing end. Incineroar into this water type.
Hey, you can see the opposite of what we saw last time. The Calyrex going from the chilly ice type into becoming a fire type this time. Incineroar going to, kind of worsen its type matchup for now, but not going to matter much for this turn. Going to try to go for a taunt onto this Amoonguss, but nothing there.
Yep, Amoonguss, it'll be able to continue using those status moves going forward, and that swap from both players does mean that Ursaluna, this go around, gets onto the turn for free. So onto the field for free. So yeah, now it's burnt, and this is where you can really get to see some pressure out.
Yeah, really exciting opportunity here for the Ursaluna where, hey, got the field, didn't get intimidated, would love to take a swing at one of these two Pokemon. But the type matchups have become a little interesting. The advantage of that Incineroar Terrestrialization is that now as a water-type Pokemon, not only does it resist Koraidon's fire-type attacks, but also now is no longer weak to the ground-type moves for Ursaluna, which would incentivize you to try to go for a normal-type attack if you're attacking that slot. Of course, with the Ghost-type Annihilate in the back, you really don't want to risk whiffing a Facade, which would likely lose the game. So Wolfe gonna have to make a good prediction here. Likely have to headlong rush one of these Pokemon, hope to pick up big damage, and it will be into this Miraidon slot.
Yeah, and Miraidon not able to protect, and also on the type chart doesn't fare too well. That would be interesting. Of course, the Miraidon is faster, but Amoonguss with that Rage Powder will be able to keep its partner Ursaluna safe. Now Miraidon, that's going to be the Volt Switch. This is great. The Incineroar had just swapped out, and now Miraidon will be able to bring it back onto the field. I'm sure Incineroar is not going to appreciate what's about to happen next, but...
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate it a lot more than it would without the Terrestrialization, right? I really like how Marcus plays these turns. He's going to take this attack pretty well, because he's going to get the Intimidate down first. And certainly any attack from an Ursaluna is going to be quite painful, but I think Marcus mitigated this pretty well, going to... ooh, geez, that still does a lot, but it survives and now has the fake out pressure this turn.
That's going to be the important part. We made it through. We survived. Rocky Helmet's going to be a little bit of damage, burn just a little bit more. So slowly but surely trying to put this Ursaluna into a little bit more favored. And now Annihilate's back on the field. And again, this Annihilate full health. And yeah, I can pick a move with that Choice Scarf and just be so fast.
Yeah, sort of a fun situation now. You see Wolfe considering another tricky decision where, I think on the Annihilate side, what does it choose to lock into here, right? Where I think a final Gambit to try to take out the Amoonguss may be very tempting. Wolfe has some fun options to play around that. But instead, the Annihilate just going to leave the battle, and that could be just as dangerous.
Yeah, this is a big pivoting game now. Miraidon back out onto the field. It is just that continued back and forth. And going on into the turn, Amoonguss yet again protect. Now, I'm eyeing up the bear and the cat out on the field. Fake out Incineroar, Ursaluna, not doing too much.
Yeah, it's an important fake out there. We saw what Wolfe locked into. That likely would have been a game losing had Incineroar gone for anything that wasn't fake out there. But instead, Miraidon again getting back out in the field safely, and this is going to be a very critical turn. There is certainly the option of getting an attack off here with the Ursaluna with a Rage Powder, but we'd likely have to lose the Amoonguss to do it. Wolfe going to have to decide if he's willing to do that at this point in the battle or not. only has that Koraidon in the back that's already been weakened a little bit with the speedy Miraidon to deal with. So needs to avoid getting himself in a situation where he can't close the game out with the remaining Pokemon.
And slowly but surely for this match, as much momentum we had in the first couple of turns, this has started to really slow down. And going on forward, it has been Wolfe that's been having the Pokemon be damaged a little bit more and more throughout this. Going on into the turn, talking about that preservation, Amoonguss with Regenerator, you can swap out, get HP later, which does mean Koraidon is going to make a reappearance back out onto the field. We're going to set up that Sunlight as well. But I'm curious, looking at this Miraidon, where that's going to be. That is the Draco Meteor, and of course, into the Miraidon. It already had a lot of health taken away, so Koraidon is down. Wolfe, only 2 Pokemon left. This Ursalunas, though, even though it's had the attack drop, I'm curious if he can make enough momentum going on forward, but it has been taking so much damage. And that knockoff, Ursaluna, just down to 30 HP, so might not have enough. Headlong Rush, Miraidon, that will pick up the KO, but now it's going to be Marcus Dion with 2 quite big attackers.
Yeah, I think the only positive thing you can say for Wolfe is he got that Amoonguss out of the battle to heal, but I don't know if it's going to matter. Ursaluna doesn't have much time left. I think for Wolfe to get out of this game, you either have to, maybe get like an Earthquake crit here, or try to get in a situation where you can power and puff the Ursaluna, but I just don't know why you would allow that if you're Marcus, and it's almost hard to make that mistake. There's no choice but to attack with this Annihilate, but the Choice Scarf, that's all it can do, and while I think the Amoonguss is potentially healthy enough to survive a final Gambit, I don't know that it's going to matter.
Yeah, going on into this, I mean, might as well just go for absolutely everything at this point, right? Rage Powder, make sure the Annihilate can't hit into it, and then see it with this Earthquake can do enough. Annihilate, though, still at that full HP.
Yeah, that's the thing. Unless the Annihilate was to, I guess the trick would be, I think the Ursaluna can survive another turn of burn damage. If Annihilate were to lock into Final Gambit or Shadow Claw for some reason, you get in a situation where you can knock out the Incineroar and then Annihilate can't hit Ursaluna. That would be a win for Wolfe, but I just don't think that's super likely. However, if you don't lock in one of those moves, it's tough to actually damage the Amoonguss with the Annihilate, right? Close combat's not really going to do anything to it. Tenuous decision, Wolfe's got to pick something.
Ooh, in the last seconds to lock that redirection into the Headlong Rush, and this is going to be such a pivotal turn for the battle, and whether Wolfe can take a Shadow Claw, Annihilate into the Amoonguss, that's not necessarily going to be the damage, and doing just as much damage in return with that Rocky Helmet. Knock off Amoonguss again. Now it's going to be this Ursaluna. We got to see that it was just the single target pivoted at that last second, and into the Annihilate. Not enough for the KO here, and Ursaluna still that timer, but I think how we saw this play out in Game 1, it's still enough to be holding on.
Yeah, it's very close here. And, it's worth keeping in mind this Incineroar doesn't have Protect. So will a Rage Powder be enough here to allow Ursaluna to get one more Earthquake out? It would certainly knock off the Pokemon. If Annihilate can't knock out Amoonguss, Wolfe might take this one.
And we saw how much Shadow Claw, which is locked into, did on that last turn. So eyeing up, maybe needing to go for something like that critical hit. Shadow Claw comes on through. Amoonguss is just soaking up so much damage. And of course, in that knockoff, 1 HP, there's going to be the critical hit there.
The final swing, it's got to do it.
That's going to be 3 KOs on the turn. You take down your own Amoonguss, but that's going to be the game-winning move. Wolfe Glick to take the series 2-0 and make his way into day 2 here at Anaheim.
What a dramatic finish. That Ursaluna was so low on HP, both Game 1 and Game 2, but just barely able to get that attack off. Wolfe did a great job of setting up that board, so all the Pokemon were just weakened enough. There was such great pivoting for that whole second game where Wolfe really had to work around you. Marcus had the 2 quickest Pokemon remaining, so they really had to get into checkmate there, but wound up with the final 2 Pokemon on Marcus's team, neither having Protect, getting him in a situation where without a critical hit, none of the decisions he made would have been enough. Really exciting final game there.
And I'm just thinking back to that one decision when